The screen fades in with sweeping aerial shots of Canada, towering mountains in British Columbia, endless wheat fields in the prairies, frozen tundra in the north, and the bustling skyline of Toronto. The camera then zooms in to a close-up of a single Canadian dollar coin lying in someone's palm. Light glimmers off its golden surface, revealing the iconic image of the loon. Every nation tells its story in symbols, some through monuments carved in stone, some through flags flying in the wind, and some through the very money they use every single day. In Canada, one small, round, golden coin carries a story as vast as the country itself. The Canadian dollar coin known to nearly every Canadian as the Loonie isn't just currency. It's a piece of national identity, a bridge to history, and a reminder of what it means to be Canadian. The power of a coin. At first glance, a coin may seem insignificant. It jingles in your pocket, buys you a coffee, or disappears into a jar on the kitchen counter. But every coin has a deeper story. Coins are storytellers. They are miniature canvases of history and politics, of economy and art. They endure far longer than paper money, often passing through the hands of millions across decades, even centuries. And in Canada, the dollar coin is perhaps the best example of how a small piece of metal can represent an entire nation's journey. Archival images appear on screen: colonial fur traders exchanging goods, Indigenous peoples trading tools and furs, British and French coins used in the 18th century, and early paper money issued after Confederation. Before the Canadian dollar coin, there were other forms of currency: shells, trade goods, foreign coins, even paper notes. Each of these reflected the challenges of building a nation across vast geography and diverse cultures. But the dollar coin, the Loonie, emerged as something unique. More than a tool of trade, it became a cultural symbol, woven into jokes, traditions, and even politics. Why a coin matters in Canada. Why does Canada's dollar coin matter so much? The answer lies in the coin's role as both a practical tool and a cultural emblem. On one hand, the Loonie was born out of necessity, replacing paper banknotes that were too costly to print and wore out too quickly. On the other, its design, its name, and even its unexpected popularity turned it into something far greater than a piece of currency. It became a symbol Canadians could hold in their hand, a symbol of thrift, resilience, and humor. Cut to interviews with Canadian citizens, young and old, reminiscing about their first Loonie, or laughing about losing one between couch cushions. A shopkeeper recalls giving out change when the Loonie first appeared, and customers looked at it with confusion. Another person recalls their grandparents saving jars full of loonies for family trips, setting the stage for history. But to truly understand the Canadian dollar coin, we must step back. Long before the first Loonie was minted in 1987, Canada had a complex relationship with money. From barter systems among Indigenous peoples, to French and British coins in colonial times, to the silver dollars of the early 20th century, every stage of Canadian history left its mark on the currency. The Loonie didn't appear overnight. It was the result of centuries of economic experiments, political decisions, and national identity building. Images shift to early Canadian silver dollars, shining with images of explorers, monarchs, and national symbols. Then, footage of Ottawa in the 1980s, where officials debated how to modernize Canada's currency, the coin that defined a nation. When the Loonie was introduced, Canadians were skeptical. Many wondered why replace the paper dollar that had worked for decades. Why this odd, heavy coin? Yet within just a few years, the Loonie had taken root in Canadian life. Its distinctive loon design, a water bird common across Canada, gave the coin its nickname, and Canadians embraced it with humor and pride. Today, the word Loonie is so common that it has become inseparable from the Canadian identity. Politicians talk about the Loonie rising or falling on world markets. Businesses price goods in loonies. Even Canadian athletes carry a Loonie under the ice for good luck in the Olympics. Footage plays of the 2002 Winter Olympics in Salt Lake City were a hidden Loonie placed at center ice during the hockey tournament became a national good luck charm. Canada won gold, and the coin was enshrined in Canadian folklore. Canada in a coin. A coin is more than metal, it's memory. And the Canadian dollar coin carries many layers of memory. It recalls the transition from paper to coin. It reflects Canada's natural beauty in the loon that graces its reverse. It speaks to Canada's monarchy in the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, and now King Charles III, on its obverse. It celebrates anniversaries, Indigenous heritage, great events, and the milestones of Canadian history through its many commemorative editions. And it reminds Canadians of who they are, a nation both practical and proud, thrifty yet rich in culture, serious yet playful. In this documentary, we will journey through the entire history of the Canadian dollar coin. In 10 chapters, we will begin with the earliest days of trade and barter in Indigenous societies and trace the arrival of European coins in North America. We will explore how Canada built its own currency after Confederation, the rise and fall of silver dollars, and the technological challenges of minting modern coins. We will witness the birth of the Loonie in 1987, the arrival of its companion, the Toonie, and the explosion of commemorative dollar coins that tell the story of Canada in miniature. Finally, we will look ahead to the uncertain future of coins in an increasingly digital age. Before Canada had coins, before it had paper money, even before it was called Canada, there was trade. For thousands of years, Indigenous peoples across the land exchanged goods in systems based not on coins or currency, but on reciprocity, trust, and barter. Birchbark, furs, shells, beads, tools, and food items all served as valuable trade goods. These items had meaning beyond their material worth. They carried cultural, spiritual, and practical significance. Among the most famous of these early trade items was the wampum belt, crafted from shells. Wampum wasn't simply money, it was a medium of memory and treaty, a record of promises made and alliances formed. When Europeans later arrived, they misunderstood wampum as mere currency. But for Indigenous nations, it was something far deeper, a sacred language of exchange, obligation, and history. The arrival of European currency. When Europeans first came to North America, in the 16th and 17th centuries, they brought their own money. French, Spanish, Dutch, and British coins all made appearances. But here in the colonies, these coins often held little real value. Why? Because coins were scarce. Colonists lived thousands of kilometers from the royal mints of Europe, and the shipments of coins that did arrive were quickly hoarded, lost, or melted down. What mattered more were furs, fish, and timber, commodities that could be traded internationally. In this sense, the early Canadian economy wasn't driven by currency at all, it was fueled by goods. Beaver pelts as currency. Perhaps no single item played a larger role in early Canadian trade than the beaver pelt. In the 1600s and 1700s, beaver fur hats were all the rage in Europe, and the demand seemed endless. The Hudson's Bay Company and other fur trading enterprises effectively built an empire on the beaver. In practice, beaver pelts became a form of currency. Trappers and Indigenous hunters could trade pelts for knives, blankets, guns, and tools. The made beaver, a standard unit representing one prime quality. Pelt was as close to $1 as one could get in the fur trade era. Imagine this. For one made beaver, you might purchase one metal kettle. For half a made beaver, perhaps a knife or a handful of beads. The Hudson's Bay Company even printed beaver tokens to represent these values. Long before the Canadian dollar existed, the beaver was already Canada's unofficial coin. But what happened when coins truly ran out? In 17th century New France, officials faced a constant shortage of hard currency. The colonies desperately needed money for soldiers, trade, and daily life. Their solution was as creative as it was unusual. They used playing cards as money. The governor of New France, Jacques de Mules, ordered that playing cards be cut, signed, and assigned values as temporary currency. For decades, these cards circulated like money, passed from hand to hand in markets and taverns. It worked at least for a while. But over time, counterfeiters, inflation, and economic instability plagued the system. Eventually, the Crown in France banned the use of card money. Yet this strange experiment remains one of the most fascinating chapters in Canada's monetary history. Imagine being paid not in coins, not in paper bills, but in a deck of cards. The rise of colonial coins. By the 18th and 19th centuries, more stable forms of currency began to appear. Colonial governments issued tokens and coins to facilitate trade. Some bore images of ships, farmers, or monarchs. These coins were often privately minted, not official legal tender, but they filled the gaps left by shortages of real currency. Canadians grew accustomed to a patchwork of coins: British halfpennies, American cents, Spanish reales, and local tokens all jumbled together in everyday transactions. In fact, Spanish silver coins and the famous pieces of 8 were so widely used across the Americas that they were cut into smaller pieces called bits. Even in Canada, prices were sometimes quoted as 2 bits or 4 bits, a practice that lingered well into the 19th century toward a Canadian currency. As Canada moved toward Confederation in 1867, the need for a unified, stable currency became more pressing. The colonies could no longer rely on a hodgepodge of furs, cards, tokens, and foreign coins. A national economy needed a national dollar. Inspired by the decimal system of the United States, Canadian leaders began to design a currency system that would be distinctly Canadian, yet compatible with international trade. This would set the stage for the Canadian dollar itself and, eventually, the iconic dollar coin. From shells and beads, to beaver pelts and playing cards, to the first colonial tokens, the story of money in early Canada was one of constant adaptation. Canadians have always found creative ways to trade, even when coins were scarce. But with Confederation, the time had come to unify the system. And so, the Canadian dollar was born not yet a coin, but a currency that would grow, change, and evolve with the nation itself. In 1867, the Dominion of Canada was born. 4 provinces, Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia, joined together in a political union that would eventually stretch from the Atlantic to the Pacific and into the Arctic. But with Confederation came an urgent question: how should this new country manage its money? Up to this point, Canadians had used a jumble of currencies: British pounds, American dollars, Spanish silver coins, and local colonial tokens. A national economy could not grow on such uncertainty. Canada needed a single, stable system, a dollar of its own. The solution arrived in 1871, just 4 years after Confederation. The young Canadian Parliament passed the Currency Act, which officially established the Canadian dollar as the nation's unit of currency. Canada adopted a decimal system, modelled after the United States, in which $1 equaled 100 cents. This decision marked a break from Britain's traditional pounds, shillings, and pence, a bold move that aligned Canada more closely with its North American neighbour. It was a practical choice. Trade with the United States was growing rapidly, and a decimal system simplified cross-border commerce. Yet at the same time, Canada remained a proud member of the British Empire. Its coins and notes would still carry the image of the reigning monarch, reminding every Canadian of their ties to the crown. From its very beginning, the Canadian dollar reflected the country's dual identity: North American in its practicality, British in its symbolism. Before coins, there were notes. The Dominion of Canada began issuing paper money in the 1870s. Large, elaborately designed bills in denominations, ranging from 25 cents to $1,000. These notes, sometimes called shinplasters, were both practical and artistic. They featured allegorical images of industry, agriculture, and transportation, as well as portraits of Queen Victoria. For the first time, Canadians could hold in their hands money that was distinctly their own, not borrowed from Britain, not copied from the United States, but made in and for Canada. The first Canadian silver dollar. Yet for all the progress of the 19th century, it was not until the 20th that Canada introduced what would become one of its most iconic pieces of currency, the silver dollar. In 1935, to mark the Silver Jubilee of King George V, the Royal Canadian Mint struck Canada's very first silver dollar. On the reverse, designed by Emmanuel Hahn, was an image that would become legendary: a voyageur paddling a canoe, accompanied by an Indigenous guide, with the Northern Lights dancing in the background. The image was rich with symbolism. The canoe represented Canada's fur trade heritage, the partnership between Indigenous peoples and European settlers, and the vast northern wilderness. For many Canadians, the silver dollar was not just money, it was a work of art, a statement of identity, and a piece of national pride. The voyageur dollar. The 1935 silver dollar was so popular that it became an annual issue. Known as the voyageur dollar, it would be minted for decades, each coin struck in 80% silver. These dollars were rarely used in everyday purchases. Instead, they were treasured as gifts, keepsakes, and symbols of prestige. To receive a silver dollar was to receive something special, something worth far more than its face value. Over time, the silver dollar became a part of Canadian tradition. It marked milestones, birthdays, retirements, weddings. It was given to children as a first keepsake, tucked away in drawers and albums. In many homes, the silver dollar was not spent but saved, a reminder of heritage and continuity. By the mid-20th century, Canada's dollar coin had become a powerful symbol of national identity. Each design told a story of explorers, monarchs, and the northern wilderness. The coin's very existence said something important. Canada was a nation mature, enough to mint its own money, proud enough to celebrate its heritage, and unified enough to carry a single dollar from coast to coast. But as beautiful as the silver dollar was, it faced practical challenges. By the 1960s, the rising cost of silver made it too expensive to mint coins from precious metal. Canada, like many other nations, had to transition to more affordable metals. In 1968, the composition of the silver dollar was changed to nickel, a decision that disappointed collectors but made sense economically. The new coins were larger, heavier, and shinier, but they lacked the luster of silver that had made earlier dollars so treasured. By the late 20th century, Canada's paper dollar bill had become increasingly expensive to produce and short-lived in circulation. Each bill lasted only about a year before wearing out. Coins, by contrast, could last decades. The government began to consider replacing the paper dollar with a coin, an idea that would change Canadian money forever. But that story belongs to a later chapter. The Canadian dollar was born out of Confederation, shaped by the Currency Act of 1871, and embodied in the silver dollars of the 20th century. It was a currency that reflected both practicality and pride, both economic necessity and national identity. The silver dollar became a symbol of continuity, a reminder that money is not only a tool of trade, but also a marker of who we are. And yet, the true transformation of Canada's dollar coin was still to come. In the 1980s, a new coin would appear, one that would capture the imagination of the nation, and forever change the way Canadians thought about their money. When the first Canadian silver dollar was struck in 1935 to commemorate King George VI's Silver Jubilee, it was more than a coin. It was a declaration. Canada, still a relatively young dominion, was asserting its identity through currency, creating a national treasure that combined artistry, symbolism, and pride. The design by Emmanuel Hahn captured Canada's essence, a voyageur and an Indigenous guide paddling through rugged waters, with bundles of furs loaded in the canoe and the northern lights shimmering above. This single image encapsulated centuries of history: the fur trade, Indigenous partnerships, the wilderness, and the spirit of exploration. For Canadians, it was instantly recognizable, deeply meaningful, and proudly national. From the beginning, the silver dollar was not a coin of everyday commerce. Few Canadians would ever use it to buy groceries or pay for a train ticket. Instead, it was a coin of prestige, a gift coin, a collector's item, a symbol of achievement. To receive a silver dollar was an honor. Families kept them in display cases. Children received them as keepsakes, and soldiers carried them overseas as reminders of home. It wasn't uncommon for grandparents to slip a silver dollar into a grandchild's hand, with the advice, "Don't spend it, save it." And most Canadians did just that. The silver dollar rarely circulated. Instead, it lived in drawers, albums, and family memory boxes, slowly becoming part of the nation's collective heritage. The silver dollar also became a stage for national pride. Special editions were issued to mark milestones, royal visits, anniversaries, and centennials. Each design told a story. In 1939, a commemorative silver dollar was struck to mark the royal visit of King George VI and Queen Elizabeth, the first reigning monarchs to set foot in Canada. The coin's reverse featured the Parliament buildings in Ottawa, lit by rays of sunlight, a design meant to evoke both Canada's democratic spirit and its loyalty to the Crown. In 1967, Canada celebrated its centennial with one of the most Beloved coin series in history, the Centennial coins. Designed by Canadian artist Alex Colville. The silver dollar featured a Canada goose in flight, majestic, strong and free. It was a bold departure from monarchs and parliament buildings, instead celebrating the natural heritage of the nation. Why silver? Because precious metals carry weight not just physical, but symbolic. Silver has long represented stability, trust, and enduring value. A paper note might wear and tear, but a silver dollar endured. To many Canadians, the silver dollar was not simply worth $1, it was worth far more. It was a piece of wealth, a piece of art, and a piece of history. This symbolism extended beyond the household. Governments and institutions often presented silver dollars as ceremonial gifts. They were handed to visiting dignitaries, awarded at school graduations, and given as tokens of recognition. To receive one was to be recognized as part of Canada's story. But as the 20th century advanced, silver became less practical. By the 1960s, the global price of silver was rising rapidly. To strike every dollar in silver became financially unsustainable. Canada faced a difficult choice: abandon the tradition or change the metal. In 1968, the Royal Canadian Mint shifted production of the dollar coin from silver to nickel. The new coins were larger, heavier, and shinier, but they lacked the precious metal luster that had given earlier dollars their magic. Collectors lamented the change. To them, a nickel dollar was just another coin, stripped of the symbolic richness of silver. Yet the tradition endured. The designs continued, the commemorative issues kept coming, and the silver dollar's prestige lingered even if its metal had changed. Despite the shift away from precious metal, the silver dollar remained embedded in Canadian memory. For older generations, it carried nostalgia, the feel of cool silver in hand, the pride of owning a coin that seemed too beautiful to spend. For younger Canadians, it became a link to family heritage, something found in an attic box or inherited from grandparents. Even today, many Canadians can recall the first time they held a silver dollar, its weight and shine unlike anything else in their pocket. The silver dollar's greatest legacy, however, may be its role in shaping Canadian identity. Each design was a story of explorers and monarchs, of wildlife and wilderness, of Parliament and Confederation. In a nation as vast and diverse as Canada, symbols matter. They help unite people across distances and cultures. The silver dollar was one of those symbols, small enough to fit in a pocket, yet powerful enough to embody the values of an entire country. When Canadians looked at the silver dollar, they saw more than money. They saw themselves, a nation forged in exploration, built in partnership, rich in nature, proud of heritage, and ready for the future. By the 1980s, the era of the silver dollar was fading. The coin was largely ceremonial, rarely seen in circulation. Paper dollars were still dominant in everyday life. Yet the government faced a problem. The paper dollar was costly to maintain, wearing out in just a year or two. A coin would last decades. The solution was clear: Canada needed a new dollar coin. One. For more than 3 decades, the Canadian silver dollar symbolized pride and heritage. It was treasured as a gift, admired as a collectible, and celebrated as a national symbol. But by the late 1960s, silver had become a luxury Canada could no longer afford. The price of silver was rising rapidly across the globe, and the cost of producing coins exceeded their face value. Canada faced a stark choice: either stop issuing silver dollars altogether, or change the metal. In 1968, the Royal Canadian Mint made a historic decision. The silver content in the dollar coin would be replaced with nickel. This marked the end of the silver era in Canadian coinage, and the beginning of something new, an age of modern metals, designed for durability, practicality, and cost efficiency. Why nickel? The answer lay deep in the Canadian Shield. Canada was and remains one of the world's largest producers of nickel, with vast reserves in Sudbury, Ontario. Using nickel for coinage was both economical and symbolic. It allowed Canada to draw on its own natural resources, while reducing dependency on precious metals tied to volatile global markets. Nickel was also durable, resistant to corrosion, and capable of being struck into sharp, detailed designs. For Canada, this was more than a cost-saving measure. It was a chance to showcase its industrial strength. A nickel dollar wasn't just a piece of money. It was a piece of Canada's land, mined from its rocks forged in its furnaces, and carried in the pockets of its citizens. The new nickel dollar. The first nickel dollars appeared in 1968, at 32 millimeters in diameter, and weighing 15.62 grams. They were among the largest and heaviest coins in circulation. Their reverse design retained the iconic voyageur canoe, while the obverse bore the familiar portrait of Queen Elizabeth II. The new coins gleamed brilliantly when freshly struck, but their size and weight made them cumbersome in everyday use. Canadians admired their beauty but often found them impractical. In practice, the nickel dollar followed the same fate as the silver dollar. Before it, it was rarely used in day-to-day transactions. Most Canadians continued to rely on the paper dollar bill. The nickel dollar became primarily a collector's item, produced each year in limited quantities, often to commemorate special events. Commemorative nickel dollars. The 1970s and 1980s saw a flourishing of commemorative nickel dollars. Each year, the Royal Canadian Mint issued a new design, celebrating milestones in the nation's history. In 1970, a coin marked Manitoba's centennial, featuring a bison's head. In 1971, British Columbia's centennial was honoured with a totem pole design. In 1973, Prince Edward Island's entry into Confederation was depicted on a dollar coin. These designs turned the annual issue into a national tradition, a way of telling Canada's story, one coin at a time. Collectors eagerly awaited each year's release, lining up at banks and the mint to secure their keepsakes. For many, the commemorative nickel dollars became family heirlooms, linking generations through shared symbols of nationhood. The problem with paper. While commemorative nickel dollars thrived as collectibles, the Canadian government faced a growing problem with the paper dollar bill. Each note lasted only 9 to 12 months before wearing out, requiring constant replacement at high cost. By the 1980s, the Bank of Canada was spending millions of dollars each year just to maintain the paper dollar in circulation. A coin, by contrast, could last 20 years or more. The solution was obvious: replace the paper dollar with a durable coin that could serve as the nation's workhorse. Currency. But here lay the challenge: how to design a coin that Canadians would actually use. The nickel dollar was too large, too heavy, and too entrenched as a collector's item. What Canada needed was a smaller, lighter, more practical coin, one that could circulate freely in pockets, purses, and cash registers. By the late 20th century, advances in minting technology allowed for new alloys, new finishes, and more efficient mass production. The Royal Canadian Mint, headquartered in Ottawa, had established itself as one of the most innovative mints in the world. Its engineers experimented with bronze, brass, and nickel-plated alloys, testing for durability and resistance to counterfeiting. This was the groundwork for a new generation of coins that would soon replace paper notes altogether. It was within this environment of innovation and necessity that the idea of a permanent dollar coin began to take shape. The government debated designs, metals, and dimensions. Canadians wondered what the new coin would look like. No one yet knew that it would soon become one of the most beloved and humorously nicknamed coins in Canadian history, though overshadowed by the Loonie that followed. The nickel dollar played a crucial role in Canada's monetary evolution. It bridged the gap between the symbolic silver dollar and the practical golden dollar coin of 1987. It kept alive the tradition of commemorative issues, telling stories of provinces, milestones, and cultural heritage, and it demonstrated Canada's ability to adapt shifting from precious metals to practical ones, without losing sight of identity and artistry.